Welcome to another episode of the Carolyn Glick Mideast News Hour. This week, big news is that U.S. President Joe Biden is coming to Israel and going to visit as well the Palestinian Authority in Bethlehem and then on to Saudi Arabia. So I could think of nobody better to discuss the most important aspects of Biden's upcoming trip, which I guess will be going on when this episode is aired, then my friend and colleague in Washington, Tony Badran from the Foundation for Defense of Democracies. Tony is my go-to guy on everything related to Lebanon. But I think, more broadly to talk about the general strategic trajectory of the Biden administration and where the president is planning on going, what he and his people expect to accomplish this week, and in the context in which this visit is being carried out. I think all of these things are essential, and I think that Tony brings to bear an analysis here that I think is key for understanding what's going on. So without further ado, hello, Tony. Thanks for coming onto the show this week.
Hey, thanks so much for having me back, Carolyn. I appreciate it.
Oh, it's a great pleasure. When we were on last, I think, although I didn't tell our audience, I was sick with Corona. So this time I can say I'm Corona free, and hopefully it'll be a fruitful discussion. But so let's just start. I'm just doing the timer so that we don't go too far over. All right. So first of all, we were talking beforehand about how we wanted to do it. You said you thought that a good way to start, and I agree with you, is Biden wrote an op-ed this week in the Washington Post as sort of a curtain raiser on his Middle East trip. Here it is, everybody can see. And it says, why I'm going to Saudi Arabia. So do you want to start with the headline, or do you think that we should start with the body of the article? Why don't we start with the headline? Yeah, why do you think that the president of the United States felt it necessary to explain why he was going to one of America's most important, if not most important ally in the Arab world?
That's exactly right. That's the question, and this is not the first time he's had to explain himself, quote unquote, a couple other times, and it's almost comical the way he's been trying to distance himself from the crown prince. That he's not going to really meet with him at all, and if he does meet, it's going to be an international meeting, and he'll just be there. It's
in
really
Saudi
laughable.
Arabia. This isn't at the UN General Assembly. Like he's flying out to this guy's country, right? Where he is the crown prince, and he's saying, "I'm going to diss him."
Right. And the reason why is because the position, this hostile position against Saudi Arabia has become part of the platform, let's say, of the ascending wing or faction in the Democratic Party since the Obama presidency.
And just to be very clear, this is the progressive base. And if you look across the board at every single domestic and foreign policy that Biden has pushed forward since he entered office a year and a half ago, they are all directed towards pleasing the progressive base of the Democrat Party, right? I mean, there's nothing that he's done to try to reach the moderates.
Right. In this case, there are two such agenda items, one pertaining to Saudi Arabia in terms of foreign policy, and one pertaining to energy policy and fossil fuels also, which is integral to his trip. In fact, it's the only reason for the trip, which is that he wants Saudi Arabia to increase output, because the Democrats are headed towards a midterm election with $6 a gallon prices in the United States. And the reason why it's at that level is because the Biden administration from day one has waged war against the fossil fuel industry, against refineries, against, and they don't want to change that. So they want someone else to bail them out on this, which explains this bizarre passive aggressive attitude towards the Saudis.
It actually doesn't. I mean, they need Saudi Arabia to give them oil, right? They need Saudi Arabia to produce more oil. So why are they?
Because it's part of their platform now that Saudi Arabia is not seen. It's seen as something that has to be jettisoned. It's a burden on the United States. It's something of the old. And also, if you want to look at it in more, if you like, partisan lines. It's red team, blue team, right? So Saudi Arabia is put in the Republican Trump column. And therefore, if you're looking at foreign policy as an extension of domestic policy, which is very much so with this crew, is that then this is perceived as basically not their it's not their friend, basically, right? So that's and of course then there's this issue that was done with the Khashoggi affair, where it was elevated. I mean, he is writing in the Washington Post, right, which the Washington Post had launched a major information operation after the Khashoggi murder, in order explicitly to destroy the U.S.-Saudi relationship, right? And the first thing that the Biden administration did, literally, one of its very first decisions after coming into office, was to remove the Houthis from the list of foreign terrorist organizations, immediately to stick it to the Saudis. I mean, that was number one. And there was activity in the Senate led by Bernie Sanders at the time to really damage the to cut off arms sales
well, here it even says here, I mean, this is what's so astounding to me. He's going to Saudi Arabia. He's on his way there. And this is what he writes in the Washington Post. In Saudi Arabia, we reversed the blank check policy we inherited. I released the intelligence community report on the murder of Jamal Khashoggi. Are you talking to me from an airstrip?
No, it's as it happened as we're talking. There's a severe thunderstorm that just decided to break out right now.
Oh,
so
okay.
Sorry.
All right. So we're feeling the stress. Okay, let me just say, I think it's important to point out that our good friend Lee Smith exposed that Jamal Khashoggi, who everybody has been treated as this like dissident and this human rights guy, he was friends with Osama bin Laden. I mean, this is a terrorist supporter par excellence, and he was not a green card holder. It's not clear what his status was in the United States, and so he had these close legion ties with Al Qaeda. He's writing for the Washington Post, and he has close working relations while he's in Washington with the Qatari embassy, which has also been the closest Arab ally to Al Qaeda and ISIS and Hamas for the past decade since the Arab Spring. So, and of course, the Muslim Brotherhood. So, this is the guy that the Washington Post and the Democrat Party have posted as the justification for destroying a 75-year alliance with Saudi Arabia. And when are they doing it? Just as Saudi Arabia is doing everything that successive American administrations from the time of Roosevelt really were hoping that they would do, which is that they're putting aside the Islamic jihadism that had been the concept, the formative concept of the Saudi monarchy from the time that it was established in the 1920s, and are embracing a more moderate form of Islam, defanging the religious police, and opening up, most importantly, to Israel and to the West. I mean, this is a Saudi Arabia everybody was always hoping would emerge. It's emerging, and the Americans won't have it.
Well, the interesting thing on the Israel relationship. The interesting thing that's about this, because in the op-ed, again, there's a lot of passive aggressiveness involved, and there's not really clear, but they are trying to take credit for the Israeli-Saudi attempts at coming closer together. And it's really unwarranted because it precedes them and it is independent of them. Like what the decisions that Saudi Arabia, that the Crown Prince has taken in this vein, are born out of Saudi national interest and their own national will to proceed down that road.
See, I disagree with you, Tony, on that, because I think that Biden and Obama can take major credit for the thawing in Israeli-Saudi relations, because when America first began betraying both of them, when it began under Obama already to realign the United States away from America's traditional allies in the Middle East and towards Iran, the Saudis cast about and stared at Israel and realized that Benjamin Netanyahu was all that stood between them and a nuclear Iran. And so they reached out.
Right. No, I mean, yeah, I don't think that's the kind of credit he's talking about. But yes.
It is their credit. The
Right.
Arabs, the Abraham Accords would never have happened if the Americans had been mildly less hostile to the Arabs.
I mean, it's possible. Look, I think in this particular case, they are. The analogy I would draw in a way is kind of like what Egypt and Israel did to sign their peace treaty. I mean, it was a bilateral track, right? And then the sort of the U.S. actually was looking to, which is what this administration tried to do too. They're trying to jam the Palestinians back into it,
and in between them.
Yes, and it's very clear in the op-ed that they're sticking that element in there. But there are national interests on a bilateral level and sort of geopolitical realities that are pushing these two important players and traditional American allies in this direction, independent. In fact, in this case, you can say over and against the thrust of the policy of this particular administration, specifically toward Iran, right? And in the op-ed is very obvious about this. It restates what Michael Duran and I have called the realigned strategy of Barack Obama, which is to realign the United States in the region with Iran, to elevate Iran, downgrade U.S. allies. And the infamous statement that Barack Obama made about sharing the neighborhood, that American allies need to share the neighborhoods with Iran. The second paragraph, literally the second paragraph of this op-ed, which has all the hallmarks of a certain functionary, an old-time Biden aide, is that immediately it starts with this sharing the neighborhood thesis. And leads from there. So it's in a way, if you want this, the op-ed is itself a restatement of the realignment thesis, which has been the platform since Barack Obama and continues to be.
All right, so let's just talk a little bit about where Biden wants to go here. I mean, you said, first of all, let's just talk about the Palestinians. I know in Israel, everybody is scope locked on the Palestinians for reasons that have to do, I think, mainly with the media's inability to deal with strategic issues, but and their addiction to the peace process, the left's addiction to the peace process, even though the peace process, to all intents and purposes, died in 2000 at Camp David. At any rate, Biden is coming here, and his policies towards Israel and the Palestinians are incredibly hostile towards Israel. Like, there's nothing pro-Israel at all about his policies in relation to Israel and the Palestinians. I mean, he actually alludes to it here, and you pointed it out to me ahead of time, which was that, he talks about, where is it? Here it is. I know that there are many who disagree with my decision to travel to Saudi Arabia, meaning all of you who voted for me, because you all think that Iran is way better than our allies. My views on human rights are clear and longstanding, and fundamental freedoms are always on the agenda when I travel abroad, as they will be during this trip, just as they will be in Israel and the West Bank. So what he's saying here is that, Saudi Arabia is horrible because they killed this guy who supported Osama bin Laden. And Israel, and when I go, and Israel, as far as I'm concerned, is also on the dock. And just last week, in an incredibly hostile act, the State Department put out a statement about the death of Al Jazeera reporter Shireen Abu Akleh, where they laid responsibility for her death in a firefight between Israel and the Palestinian Islamic Jihad in Jenin, right in the wake of a massive terrorist attack in Israel. And they laid the blame for her death on Israel. And so, this is, and apparently the administration or Shireen Abu Akla's family has asked to meet with Biden while he's in Israel. So, they're milking this to the very end, as one would expect, but the administration has already, in almost every statement, they attack settler violence, of which there is essentially none. And here we are.
Right. So, I mean, again, forgive me for going back always to my article with Mike Duran, because I really believe, and that's why we wrote it, to sort of lay out the template for what this, what the Barack Obama worldview in the Middle East is about. And it's very funny because you always see it replayed in certain aspects. We put out a segment on the Palestinian in the piece, in which we discussed sort of the values, the issue of the values, right? That they can always raise it as a club against Israel. So, and that's what the op-ed says, right? The values is going to be a club I'm going to raise against Saudi Arabia, which incidentally, the notion that he is chastising or citing Saudi Arabia over extraterritorial killings at a time when the administration was effectively hiding, and it came out as a leak and revealed, it didn't come out from the administration, that the IRGC was actively planning the assassination of 3 former US officials, including Mike Pompeo. And this was happening as Robert Malley was negotiating, and it didn't stop Robert Malley from negotiating.
No.
In fact, you start seeing leaks about them trying to come to an understanding about this, including having the Iranians pinky promise that they won't do it. And then that devolved into something worse, where it becomes mutual, reciprocal steps by the administration so that we promise not to kill IRGC terrorists. If they promise not to kill American citizens on U.S. soil, okay? So this is happening at the same time, but the values club is very useful. Whether it's with the settlers, whether it's this Shireen Abu Akleh thing. The statement is very interesting that you alluded to, that you mentioned with Ned Price, because it reads, if you actually parse it stylistically, it reads as though they're almost disappointed that there was no silver bullet, as it were, that pins it on Israel. And even though they say there's no evidence, nothing is conclusive, nevertheless, they still pinned it on Israel,
right,
and said it's most likely Israel, and we expect accountability. Right? So meaning what? Meaning we will use this as a club, and we'll keep it over your head to be used whenever we want it to be used. And that's what he did with the Saudis as well. And he reiterated it in the op-ed. Again, to underscore the point, the op-ed is a restatement of the realignment agenda. Full stop.
No, I couldn't agree more. And I think that it's important. So we understand that what we have here is a wholly hostile US administration insofar as Israel is concerned, and insofar as the Sunni states of the Gulf and Egypt are concerned. But, there are two things going on at the same time, that these are sort of in the foreground. The Arabs, what was shown very, very clearly by the Abraham Accords is that a very large number of Arab states, I won't say the majority, although I think it is the majority, are more interested in good relations with Israel than they care about the Palestinians. And an increasingly large number of Arab states can't stand dealing with the Palestinians anymore because they see it as something that stands in their way to having close cooperative relations with Israel. And because they think that they're freeloaders, but who also support their enemies like Iran and Muslim Brotherhood and others. But the Palestinians have increasingly become a Western cause
Right.
for war. Right. That this is their Viet Cong, this is their Nicaragua's Sandinistas of today, that that the Palestinians are not propped up so much now by the Arab League and by other Arab groupings as they are by the Europeans and by the American left. So that, that this is a bow to the base. But there are larger strategic issues that the realignment of the Biden administration away from its allies and towards America's enemies, particularly Iran, but not only, are coming into play during this visit. And I want to look at it in two ways: first, from the view of Iran, and then from the view of Lebanon. And from the view of Iran, I mean, the thing that I find notable is that they keep talking about this regional alliance that they're building now through CENTCOM with now Israel. Now I'm feeling bad about it, but for a long time I was advocating for Israel to be moved to Central Command's responsibility instead of Eurocom, because basically the United States, by putting Israel in European Command, was wiping Israel off the map of the Middle East and saying, okay, never mind, we're going to accept the Arab boycott of Israel and we're going to put Israel in Europe, which geographically makes no sense and strategically makes no sense in terms of CENTCOM commanders' ability to understand the region. So now Israel is in CENTCOM, and there's a growing sense, at least I have a growing sense, that the Americans under Biden are using this as a way to prevent Israel and the Sunnis from cooperating against Iran on a military level. And in the meantime, while this is happening, and whether my suspicions are borne out or not, you just put that to the side for a second, Robert Malley, who is Biden's guy on Iran, gave this interview last Tuesday to NPR, where he said that Iran has sufficient quantities of enriched uranium to build a bomb, meaning that they've crossed the nuclear threshold, and that they are 3 weeks at most away from a nuclear bomb. So that he's saying that they have turnkey nuclear capabilities, which is what America was supposed to be committed to preventing. And now the guy who was supposedly, ostensibly supposed to enact a policy that was going to prevent Iran from going nuclear just told an NPR, too late, they already have independent nuclear military capacity. So you have on the one hand, the regional military defense pact, and on the other hand, Iran's gone nuclear. Right. So how do you look at these two things?
So, I mean, tactically, what Malley said is a preferred device that the Obama crew has always used, especially with Iran. But they did it also with Russia and Syria, the same thing, which is to say they pursue a policy that leads, to this eventuality. And then when, like for instance, they relax sanctions, they do, whatever it is that they do, right? And then when the inevitable outcome does happen, they say, well, it's too late now, and therefore it could have been prevented, but you chose a certain policy. And then they say, well, it's too late, it's a fait accompli now, we have no choice but to do what we always set out to do anyway. And this is the bottom line with the JCPOA. I mean, the JCPOA is by design, by its own letter, it leads you to this inevitable eventuality of a nuclear Iran. That's where, once, the sun's, not just that, it actually obligates the United States to help Iran set up a nuclear program. The Russians will help Iran set up a nuclear program. That's part of it. That's part of what it is, right? Now they call it peaceful. It's under safeguards. Blah blah blah. Bottom line is and then the sunset provisions disappear, and then you have an industrial infrastructure and a nuclear state. That's on its own merits, right? Now, they have also set aside all the other verification aspects about its military nature, which, to be clear, this is a military nuclear program. They set that aside, or they undermine it with the safeguards agreement, the NPT, the IAEA, you name it. That's what they systematically do. And then they turn around and they say, oh, well, there's nothing else. The issue of CENTCOM and working with them and the Saudis, Mike Duran and I called this the bear hug. It allows the United States to to sort of keep under the guise. So it serves two purposes. On the one hand, it allows the United States. So no, Israel's security and Saudi Arabia's security is paramount to us. Here are defensive equipment, military equipment designed for you to, withstand the raining down of Iranian missiles on your cities as a result, which will be amplified by our enriching Iran with hundreds of billions of dollars and unleashing it throughout the region. But hey, we care very much about your security. Here's missile defense systems for you to fend off.
Which of course is hilarious, right? Because the American Patriot systems are not as accurate as Israel's Iron Dome and David Sling facilities. So, but whatever.
But I mean, that's the idea. It allows them to say, no, we care about, but at the same time, no preemptive military attacks by you are acceptable. Read the second paragraph of the Biden op-ed in the Washington Post. Very clearly, diplomacy, share the neighborhood, de-escalate. If you all pursue military option, that is not only going to lead to the rise of extremism, which will attack us at home, i.e., Saudi Arabia and Israel. Any military adventurism by them, using their words, will lead to the rise of extremism, ISIS-type extremism, and then it could potentially also lead to American soldiers getting hurt. That's all in the second paragraph of the op-ed, right?
Well,
this is long-standing Obama-era talking points, and whenever Israel used to go out and target Iranian assets in Syria, somebody, usually at the Pentagon, some Obama-era apparatchik will leak out to the Wall Street Journal or whatever, that, hey, look, Israeli actions are putting our boys and girls in uniform in danger, because now Iran could potentially hit us in Iraq, etc. We're trying to have an anti-ISIS coalition, and now Israel's undermining it, etc., etc.
Just to sum up what you're saying, and I think you're right, is that this defensive pact that the Americans are using as sort of a bait and switch thing for Israel and the Saudis and the UAE and the rest of us is just, it's nothing. I mean, it is an empty shell, because what they're saying is, we're going to allow Iran to acquire the means to annihilate you, and we're going to give you defensive capabilities that aren't capable of meeting the challenge. And in the meantime, we're not going to block them from expanding their offensive capabilities, not only nuclear, from a nuclear perspective, right, but in all of their proxies as well.
And we frown on your taking military action against them, right? So we don't believe
it's passive aggressive,
Right. So no, I mean, it allows them to say we're working with our allies and we care about their security, even as they're progressing towards giving Iran nuclear capability. So
what is the domestic political advantage to doing this? I mean, how would you spell it out in terms of, what they're doing with this defensive pact on the one hand? And
I mean, they do that with the Iron Dome all the time. Like, hey, we care about Israel's security. We are the ones who funded. Hey, I mean, they use that with Colin Kahl's confirmation, right? The aide of President Biden, who's now the number 2 at the Pentagon.
I think.
Yeah. So it's like, yeah, look, we are the ones who gave. It's not true, by the way, but I mean, they present Colin Kahl as he's the father of the Iron Dome program, and therefore, and therefore, hey, look, what are you accusing us of being, negligent in terms of Israeli security?
Colin Kahl, if I'm not mistaken, and I don't remember offhand, so correct me if I'm wrong, but my memory, if it serves me correctly, is that he's an anti-Semite, and that he has a litany of statements that are extremely hostile towards Israel as a Jewish state.
That was, I mean, those things were leveled at him during his hearing, and a lot of people came to his aid at the time. But I mean, look, to my mind, anyone who says Israeli self-defense in the region causes the death of American boys in uniform, that is very, at least borderline anti-Semitic, right? I mean, if not outright anti-Semitic. So, I mean, that's the kind of position that these guys have held since the Obama days, anyway. But I mean, in this particular case, it allows them to continue their track with the Iranians, where there's no punitive measures, and there's clearly no talk of any military action. Of course, they actually explicitly frown upon it. And at the same time create the illusion that they're actually working with allies and taking their security interest into account. But if anyone believes that, let's say Israel does decide to take military action against Iran, it is not going to happen in the framework of a cooperative strike with the United States. The United States is not going to end up taking military action, under this administration, taking military action against the Iranian nuclear program. That's just not going to happen. So the idea that this CENTCOM framework is somehow presages a joint U.S.-Israeli military cooperation to strike Iranian infrastructure, I don't think anyone believes that.
No, it's pure fantasy, but and I think you're right, and I think that the aspect here that's for domestic political consumption is the idea that, well, I mean, the Americans are building this whole strategic defense pact, and it's great, and it's like an Israeli-Arab NATO under America, right, under CENTCOM, and what a revolutionary idea! Except that the lead here is hidden, which is that, in the meantime, and before any of this happened, and in fact, probably none of this is really going to happen, but even if it does or if it doesn't, thanks to Biden, Iran now is a turnkey nuclear state at best.
Well, I mean, if we believe what Malley wants to push.
Well, I mean, why shouldn't we believe? Wait, no.
I think that's the inevitable outcome.
Certainly, we should.
No, I think that's the intended outcome anyway, to begin with. But I'm saying in this particular case, it allows them to continue with the same policy track while deflecting any or even creating the illusion, right? Because Mali's in a bind right now because he's eager to get the Iranians to sign, but he had promised them that he'll take the IRGC off of the FTO list. And ever since it was revealed that the IRGC is plotting to murder Americans on American soil, this created a lot of backlash domestically in the United States. And they've had to walk it back, but the promise had been made. So now they're just trying to figure out under what guise they're going to make that concession.
Which is so crazy, right? I mean, these people are trying to kill the former Secretary of State, right, the former president, and right, the former National Security Advisor. And America is trying to make excuses to the Iranians, right, why it's not possible to go forward.
And they've allowed to give visas entry to the United States of former IRGC members. That's one of the concessions that they gave them as well. So, I mean, potential spies and potential agents now have visas to come in. But one of the interesting things about this, to go back about the CENTCOM stuff, is that they have been, since this delay happened, because of the IRGC terrorism list issue, they have been leaking deliberately that, look,
who's they?
The administration, that somehow, or fostering some opinions that, well, the deal is in trouble. The deal is in trouble. Right. We don't think, it may not happen. And therefore we're now looking at other options and possibilities. And this optics of CENTCOM with Israel allows them to foster this delusion, in my mind. I mean, or illusion.
In whose mind? I mean, who are they trying to delude? Are they trying to delude the Iranians?
I mean, to basically to U.S. allies in the region and public opinion, that the idea that who says that we're about to sign the deal with the Iranians? It may happen, it may not happen, and in fact, there's a lot of obstacles, and I put it at 50-50, et cetera, et cetera. And therefore, it fosters the illusion that, oh no, they've come to their senses,
There's a plan
and now
B.
they're working with us now on a plan B, which, by the way, includes military options. And it's not real. It's not an actual plan B. There's only plan A, the return to the JCPOA. That's it.
Well, I mean, the plan A isn't the return to the JCPOA. The plan A is to give Iran the bomb, which is
what the
according to
JCPOA is.
Mali, they already accomplished, you know.
Which is what the JCPOA is. I mean, when I
Right.
say JCPOA, is to go back to the agreement, however you define the agreement. We
Okay.
call it the realignment, etc. It's that pro-Iran approach. Whatever the vehicle for that is, JCPOA, anything else, it doesn't matter.
Okay, so wait, so we have, on the one hand, we have the West's war against the Jewish state and against Saudi Arabia on fake human rights, activism of the woke crowd that hates the Saudis because they're becoming Western and they hate Israel because it is the apotheosis of the nation state, which they want to destroy, or whatever you want to say, or proof that God exists that they don't believe in, or well, take any existential concept you want, and Israel is there at the base of it. So they hate Israel, they hate Saudi Arabia, and now they think that human rights law and whatever else you want to refer to it as should only apply to these two countries. And
the Palestinians too, as you noted. I mean, you made a very, very, very good point. I actually have made that point as well in an article I wrote a few years ago. Barack Obama, before leaving, what did he do? He passes
2234.
Correct, which endorses Palestinian rejectionism and the 1967.
That's the UN Security Council resolution that the Obama administration, the lame duck Obama administration, passed.
In its final hours,
right? And by the way, it wasn't just that they abstained to allow it to go forward. They wrote it. I mean, this was Samantha Power's baby. This was their thing. And according to Bibi Netanyahu, they were trying to pass a second one after that one passed, but he was able to convince Putin to threaten to veto it. So the Obama administration stood down and didn't advance it any further. So that Putin came in on Israel's behalf against the Obama administration on his last days in office. So that was pretty extraordinary. So yeah, so Obama.
So the point of that is, so they endorsed the 67 line. So they become the ones who endorse Palestinian rejectionism, the United States, right? The Abraham Accords is conceptually the negation of this whole framework, right? It makes it totally irrelevant. Then the Trump administration added to it by saying the Golan belongs to Israel. With it, therefore, the Sheba farms also in Lebanon. So there are no more territorial disputes on the northern border. The 67 line, as far as the United States is concerned, is finished. It doesn't exist.
Right.
Then they put the embassy issue, right, which furthers this aspect of kind of letting go of the 67 framework.
And the sovereignty plan in the Trump peace plan.
Right. The point of the Obama, to go back to your point, what are the Palestinians? The Palestinians are instruments in inter-Arab were instruments in inter-Arab fightings because they're not a state. So, you have multiple factions. You pick one, you back one, you stick it to your Arab rival. The Syrians use a faction, the Iraqis use a faction, the Libyans, etc., etc. The Iranians then ended up coming in on this game after the Arab rivalries effectively died down, and then the Iranians take center stage, right. and now they're the patrons, right? And they're the ones who use it. But you still have it. The Qataris have one, the Emiratis have another, blah blah blah, and everyone uses them as an instrument. The United States has joined this game, right? And in the classic sense. So you use the Palestinians as a means, and that's why when we said earlier about the bilateral tracks that Egypt did, that the Saudis are doing, that cuts out all of this. And at the time, Carter wanted a multilateral track. They wanted the balance. They want a comprehensive peace. They used to do that all the time. They used to do it with the Syrians. They used to do it with the Palestinians. But what does that include? That means that you have a sabotage element. That's the point of it.
Well, it gives the Palestinians also it gives the Palestinians or Assad a veto over Arab-Israeli peace. And it was interesting. I mean, I remember I was at a dinner party with the late Bernard Lewis, and he was regaling us with a story about how the Israeli and Egyptian negotiators negotiated the deal behind Carter's back.
Exactly.
That the whole Israeli-Egypt peace treaty was done despite Carter and behind his back.
And against his
Right.
plan. It's to preempt it, because otherwise it would have destroyed the possibility of it. Right. So now you're instrumentalizing, as you're talking normalization, which, by the way, remember, that's their terminology. They used to pathologically refuse to say Abraham Accords and say normalization agreements, because that's language that comes from that era and that world which they have endorsed. So now they're using that, and as they're using that, they're sticking the Palestinian thing in there, which nullifies the whole framework of the Abraham Accords anyway. And insofar as those accords are moving, they're moving on the bilateral level, exactly like it happened with the Egyptians and the Israelis before. And that's the whole point. And so now America has gone into the business, the long-standing tradition in the region of states like Syria and Iran instrumentalizing the Palestinians to sabotage or derail these types of bilateral agreements. And by the way, that's what the war with Hamas, the last war, that's what it was about. The Iranians were very open, and it's been since a talking point of Hezbollah and Iran, that the war was against the normalization track. That's what it was all about. And again, notice they use normalization too. That's part of their vocabulary. And that came after the United States had moved away initially. It happened a couple of years ago. Before now, they jumped on this bandwagon of, at least rhetorically, of fostering whatever Saudi and Israel were already doing. They were against, at the time, the whole pathologically against the Abraham Accords framework.
Well, I mean, I don't know if you remember, but I mean, at the White House signing ceremony, no Democrats participated. No Democrats participated in the opening of the embassy in Jerusalem. I happened to have been at both events. So, I mean, it was pretty amazing that, you know, you have this Israel signing a peace treaty or peace treaties with two Arab states at the time on the White House lawn, and Chuck Schumer didn't come.
Right.
Nancy.
So instead of doing that, what are the processes that they're fostering? Let's see if we can force Israel to sign a maritime border delineation accord with Lebanon so that we can pump cash into Hezbollah-controlled Lebanon.
Right. So here, you went exactly where I wanted to go, because as I told you guys at the outset, Tony is my go-to guy for Lebanon. No joke. Okay. Not trying to butter you up. I wouldn't have you on my podcast if I thought you were a dummy. But I mean, Tony understands Lebanon more keenly than anybody who writes on the subject currently, and that's why I think it's very important to discuss this with him, because there's something happening that almost nobody's talking about. Everybody sort of says, oh, it's nothing, you know, they forget about it because everybody's thinking about the Palestinians all the time. But Amos Hochstein is a member of the Biden administration who is the envoy for, I don't know, Lebanon. And he's carrying out these indirect negotiations between Israel and the government of Lebanon about Israel and Lebanon, Lebanese claims to Israeli economic waters in the Mediterranean Sea, where Israel has discovered gas fields. Okay, and so and here, if you don't mind, Tony, let me just introduce the subject a little bit. So in 2000, Israel withdrew from Lebanon to what was called the Blue Line, which was the international border as delineated by the United Nations. Okay, and after Israel withdrew from Lebanon, this was on May 31st, 2000, Hezbollah leader Hassan Nasrallah came up and said, Mount Dov, which is a very large area of the Golan Heights between Lebanon and in Israeli-controlled Golan Heights, and they said this is Lebanese territory. Now, under the UN delineation, it's Syrian territory. Okay, it's not Lebanese territory. Nobody ever gave Mount Dov to Hezbollah, but Hezbollah said, no, this is our territory. And then Hezbollah used its claim, which was false, to sovereignty over Mount Dov as a casus belli to then go, in October of 2000, attack an Israeli military position on Mount Dov and kidnap and kill 3 soldiers there. And then they used it repeatedly throughout the years as a means to attack Israel until the Second Lebanon War in 2006. So this is how they do it. And now what they've done is that Israel has found the Karish gas fields, and they put on a rig, and they're planning to start drilling there for the gas, I think in September. Yes. And so Hezbollah said, no, this is part of our economic waters. And instead of saying, no, it's not, the UN delineated Israel's economic waters and Lebanon's economic waters and Cyprus's economic waters and Greece's economic waters and so on and so forth in the Eastern Mediterranean. These are not yours. These are Israel's. Amos Hochstein comes and says, oh, let's negotiate this. Let's get a deal. So first of all, let's just talk about the deal, and then let's talk about Lebanon, okay?
Right. So I'm just going to make a slight remark on what you said, that Hezbollah actually is not necessarily claiming Karish for themselves. Now, the Lebanese did a gambit by saying that actually we could start claiming this.
I thought that they had. I'm sorry, guys. No. I thought that they had claimed Karish.
No, they didn't. You see, that's the funny part, right? So to be fair to Hochstein, I mean, what he's doing is terrible, but that's not one of them. Okay. So the Lebanese, once Israel and Cyprus agreed on their maritime border, which allowed Israel to start to develop its economic zone, and the Cypriots to start with theirs, they agreed on a line. And the agreement was based on a line that the Cypriots and the Lebanese had agreed to, but never ratified. So Israel said, okay, we will take this line and we will build upon it, since this is what you claim. After that, the Lebanese decided, no, actually, that's not ours. Ours is a line that is a few hundred kilometers further south. So the one is called the Line 1. This one is called the Line 23. Okay? And then in between, so the Americans decided, and nobody cared, because who cares what the Lebanese say and whatever. The Israelis were doing their business. They were developing their fields, as were the Cypriots. Who cares what Hezbollah-controlled Lebanon does or says? Then the U.S. administration under Obama, with Fred Hoff, it was under Obama. Yes, it was in 2000. This was after 2011, which is when the Israelis started doing it. And so this was circa 2012. Fred Hoff gets a U.S. diplomat, gets sent to decide why. He revealed the reason why. The U.S. ambassador in Lebanon at the time told him, we have to figure out a way to get Lebanon some cash, and we have to do that by helping them develop their natural resources. Out of the blue, it just came out from, let's help these guys make money, shall we? And so they sent Fred Hoff, and Fred Hoff looks at this, this triangle that between the Israeli line with Cyprus and the new Lebanese line, line 23, and says, okay, let's split it down the middle, kind of 65 or 55. Let's do it that way, and Lebanon gets the bigger share. And then comes back and tries to figure out.
You're a little bit disappearing, Tony. Can you go back a second? You kind of froze out.
Okay.
Okay, so we lost you for a second. So you were saying about Fred Hoff. What was that?
Right. So Fred Hoff is sent there because he revealed that the U.S. ambassador had told him that they wanted to find a way to have Lebanon make money, to generate revenue from Lebanon, so that it can now explore its potential offshore reserves. That's the only reason why we have this thing. It's purely based on let's pump money into Lebanon. It has nothing to do with Israel. It has nothing to do with security, maritime security, energy, none of that. It's money for Lebanon. That's
actually
explicitly.
No, it does have something to do with Israel. It's saying, let's see what we can skim off of Israel so that we can give it to the Lebanese.
Well, that's where we come to now. But when Hoff says we'll divide this disputed area almost down the middle, 55-45. The Lebanese rejected it. Hochstein tries again in 2015, 2016.
Under the Trump administration.
Right.
No,
because,
under Obama.
No, under the Obama administration. Nobody pays attention to him. It doesn't work. And it goes away. Nobody cares until someone under this Mike Pompeo State Department has the bright idea 1 month before the election, right? 1 month before the election, to revive the strike. With what purpose? The same exact purpose that the Obama crew did with Hoff in 2012, pump money into Lebanon explicitly. That's what it's all about. Let Lebanon, which by that time had its financial meltdown, let's give them a way to make money. And they thought, because they thought they were very clever, that since they were in such an economic and financial bind, it's a low-hanging fruit, no problem. We'll get it, and we'll get it done in no time. Nobody is going to give an outgoing administration anything. And these guys were so clever that they picked it in October right before the election. They didn't wait to see if they win the election or not. So they picked it in right before the election. They lost the election. At that time, the Lebanese told them, okay, we'll see, we'll wait for the Biden crew to come in and we'll make a better deal. So once they come in, they expand their claims as a negotiating tactic and saying, hey, we might actually go beyond line 23 and claim Harish as well, because and we have our expert and blah, 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 blah. The talks die down until Hezbollah makes a threat. And Hezbollah says, look, if you guys are going to start production in Karish before we settle this business and before we can start making money out of our fields, because the French Total Energy company is invested with Hezbollah in their Block 9 off of South Lebanon shore. But they have refused to begin operations because the border isn't settled and they don't want to get in any trouble. So they said, well, you're not going to start production at Karish before we get to do it as well. And therefore, we're warning you, we can disrupt any operations. So what happens? Amos Hochstein takes this threat, comes back, carries it to Israel and said, you need to do something by September or else the window is closing or else we may have a crisis on our hands. So he's leveraging Hezbollah's threat to get the Israelis to be more flexible on this. Now,
for the French, this is key. This brings us up to the current day, right? Because last week, caretaker Prime Minister Yair Lapid, who seems to not understand what the term caretaker means, went to France, met with Macron, and Macron apparently said to him, look, Total Energy wants to develop Block 9. We want you to finish the negotiations, right? And then Lapid, or an Israeli official who happened to be next to Lapid right after met with Macron, told reporters that, well, we want to let Lebanon have prosperity because that's going to stabilize the region, right? And so they're saying, yes, we want negotiations to go forward. And Israel's new line is that Hezbollah is trying to interfere with negotiations between us and the Lebanese, and harm in that way the prosperity of the Lebanese people, right? That's Israel's new line, which brings us to and that is key because Hezbollah in the meantime has sent UAVs to harass, attack, whatever it may be, the Karish gas rig twice. Once was 2 UAVs, and then several days, this was last week, and then a few days later, I think last Wednesday, they did it again with 1 UAV.
Wednesday and Saturday, yeah.
Wednesday and Saturday. So the thing is that just to be clear, right? A UAV, I don't know how much money it costs, but to shoot it down, you'd use a Barak sea-based missile, which costs over $100,000. So that this is also costly to shoot down these UAVs. At any rate, so Lapid had and Gantz, the brilliant strategist Benny Gantz himself, who they have decided that it is in Israel's strategic interest to stabilize and enable the prosperity of the Lebanese people and the success of the Lebanese government because they're a counterbalance to Hezbollah. So what do you think of that thesis, Tony?
I mean, if they do believe this, if this is not just rhetoric to show that Israel is, I don't know why Israel would want that, but okay, let's leave that aside. But like to show that Israel is not the one that's hampering negotiations. But I mean,
well, I think the very fact that they're carrying out negotiations is an indication that they actually do believe this.
Well, it's yeah. I mean, I would agree. First of all, like you said, it's a caretaker government. Why are you in this position, and why are you negotiating under the gun? Why are you allowing for the semblance that there's a blackmail happening and you're succumbing to it? All of these things are very, very bad. It sets very bad precedent down the road. If you did it now, why won't they do it again? If it has proven to be it's something that works, right? If a threat by Hezbollah to target rigs, why can't they pick it up in the future? Like what? Oh, because they signed an agreement. I mean, who cares, right? So it's bad. But there's more damage. If for the longest time, Israel has maintained, rightly, accurately, that the distinction between Lebanon and Hezbollah is fake.
Right.
And it's also dangerous because it can be used as it was used by everyone who's invested in Lebanon, be it the French, be it the Americans, to in case of a future conflict or even in types of circumstances like this one, to actually hamper Israeli maneuverability and its space to operate, because now you're targeting the beautiful Lebanese state, and now you're weakening it, and you're strengthening Hezbollah, and you need to stop, etc., right? So they rejected that outright, and now what this statement by Gantz and Lapid and this anonymous Israeli official says is that now they've gone back on that. And now all of a sudden, Israel believes that there's this fictional thing called Lebanon, which is different. And somehow, if you give this fictional Lebanon ability to develop its waters and gas reserves, then that will be something good. And by extension, it'll be bad for Hezbollah, which is why Hezbollah is trying to block it. This is false in every aspect of it. Everything I just laid out is wrong. None of it is real. So on the one hand, Hezbollah is not trying to actually derail this. They're using it as leverage to push it forward. And they're giving an assist to Amos Hochstein, which he has used to create an air of a crisis, to leverage the Israeli government, the caretaker government, both in terms of the September deadline for when the Karish operation began, but also for the November election in Israel. Right? So they want that to happen ahead of them. That's the first falsehood. The second falsehood, Hezbollah, even if you look at Hezbollah as not the dominant actor in Lebanon who controls the state, right? Nevertheless, it is plain fact for everyone to see that Hezbollah is part of the government and is part of the parliament, which means legally, they are entitled to proceeds from this gas energy windfall when it does happen legally. Leave everything else aside. So the notion of this distinction is idiotic. It doesn't belong in any reality. It's just fantasy to say things. Now, the administration uses it. The French don't use it. The French are outright. The French, they go and talk to Hezbollah directly. They're very cynical in this regard. They know Hezbollah runs things. Macron comes to Beirut, tells them, I want to work with you. He has his investments. He knows what the score is. He knows who runs things in Beirut. He goes and talks to them straight out because his interest is to have his companies invest there and to make sure that his soldiers don't get hit in UNIFIL as well. So that's the French. The Americans have a different approach because U.S. law forbids them from direct contact with Hezbollah, which is a terrorist organization. They've created a way around it. They call it the Lebanese government.
Right.
They use the Lebanese government as cutout. But let's be clear. All of the negotiation from day one, from the Pompeo period until now, all of the negotiation on this file has been happening with Hezbollah. It's just through an intermediary, be it Nabih Berri, the other Shia, the Speaker of Parliament, Hezbollah's ally. Most recently, when Hezbollah made the threat, they sent Abbas Ibrahim, who's the Shia head of general security, who's being used by the administration as a potential mediator with the Syrian regime to solve the case of the kidnapped U.S. journalist Austin Tice, who's believed to be held in a we don't know if he's alive or not, but he's either way, he's in the custody of the Syrian regime. And they're using, and so they're using Abbas Ibrahim. So Hezbollah, Abbas Ibrahim came to Washington and was feted in Washington, and he carried the Hezbollah threat with him when he came to Washington, because he's their emissary. So the negotiation that's happening between the administration and the Lebanese, it's
Wait,
with
this fella, he has an official Lebanese title as well, or what is his official Lebanese title?
Oh yeah, he's the head of general security, right? He has no diplomatic function. But everyone knows, because all of these official institutional titles in Lebanon are a joke. It's not, none of them are real, right? He's there because he's Hezbollah's guy, and he's the guy. He's the go-between, and he was always the go-between. He was the go-between since back in the Obama days in 2013, when they were getting backlash from the Syrian war, and there were explosions happening in the Dahiya, in the southern suburb where Hezbollah is. Okay, the United States shared intelligence with this guy and helped so that, because we're fighting ISIS and we don't want explosions in Beirut, blah blah.
So
blah.
he is the Lebanese negotiator who's sitting across from Amos Hochstein.
He's one of them. When Hochstein came back to Beirut, he met with him. Why are you meeting with the head of general security? What business do you have meeting with him? Because he's Hezbollah's guy.
Right.
You meet with people because that's their function. You can't meet with Hezbollah. You meet with Hezbollah's trusted emissaries. And they relay to you accurately Hezbollah's thinking on this. And, and so there is a dance that's happening here. And you saw it. He makes the threat. Amos Hochstein comes to Beirut, receives the Lebanese terms, takes it with the threat, relays it to the Israelis. As he's doing that, Hezbollah launches the UAV to amplify that position, help him leverage it. The air of crisis is enhanced, and push the Israelis to do it. Then Lapid goes to France. France reinforces it because it is the company that is literally invested in Hezbollah, in the offshore extraction. So you're dealing on both sides with people who have every interest in pumping money to Hezbollah and investing in Hezbollah, and you're dealing with it as though these guys are somehow on your side in this, that are going to take your side, and you have to continue with this charade. And so the way out is to blame it on Hezbollah and say that they're trying to derail the negotiation. The only way out is to say, no, we're not doing any of this. There are things here that are at play that are far more important even than the actual negotiations. There are things that will affect our security down the line. How we succumb under blackmail, how we envision our relationship with Lebanon, how we see Hezbollah's position in Lebanon, whether we're entangling ourselves now in some sort of a business partnership, a three-way business partnership with the French and Hezbollah on the other hand. It's just insane. There are a lot of consequences to this, and none of them are good. And what's more,
and all of it, and the thing that's so distressing to me is that none of this is being analyzed in any serious way by Israel. I mean, if you look at every single one, I'm the only person that I've seen in the Israeli media who's been paying attention to what's happening in Lebanon, and who we're actually holding these negotiations with, and what it means, not for our security and for our ability to continue operating from a position of strength vis-a-vis Hezbollah. Everybody else is saying, well, we want to reach a deal because otherwise, we're going to undermine the position of the Lebanese government against Hezbollah.
I mean, that's a joke. That's a joke. This is not a real thing, undermine the position of the Lebanese government. These are words that don't have any reference.
And it's very strange because there was an article in Makori Shon, which is a nominally right-wing paper, although they hate Netanyahu, and about Hezbollah, that was based on research from the Alma Center, which is a center, security think tank in Metula, that specializes mainly in Hezbollah. And so they put out a report that the journalists at Makori Shon essentially regurgitated, and they were just mapping out all of Hezbollah's entities inside of Lebanon, from their youth movement and their educational facilities and their sporting apparatuses and so on and so forth, to their various military things, their foreign policy apparatuses, their this, that, and their state within the state. But one of the things that they said that I found remarkable was when they were talking about the Hezbollah naval force, and they were going through their arsenal of missiles and where they got them from the shipborne missiles, and they have mini subs that can carry a crew of up to 20 people. And a bunch of other fairly remarkable things that are Iranian and some Chinese, I think. But then they also said that they have American missiles. They have American ship-to-ship missiles because they get them from the LAF. That they're getting munitions from the LAF, and that the forces themselves are capable, that they have a special force inside of their naval force that's capable of using armaments from various militaries.
No, I mean, look, if they want to take something from the LAF, they can always take it from the LAF. That's always a red herring for people to say, oh, they never did. Well, yeah, okay, they never did until they do. But in fact, what they did in 2006 was to use, when they attempted to sink the Khanit, right? They used Lebanese
Chinese.
Well, they use a Chinese, based on a Chinese, the Silkworm C-802 missile,
right.
But they used the LAF's radars to do it. So I don't know if that's what they meant in the Alma Center.
No,
I'm not
they
sure.
weren't. They were talking about the actual missiles, but
yeah, I'm not sure what they're referencing with that. But I mean, they have used the radars for sure. What's interesting, I mean, they have also submerged UAVs, not UAVs, like the equivalent of a UAV, but submerged submarine underwater, right? So like a submarine drone, basically. And they have other things. But the point is, the response to this is not, then we better cut a deal with them on their terms.
No,
I mean, that's
Lebanon
not
is a forward base is not a country, it's an IRGC base. That's what it
is.
That's
the essential point, right? It's like, you can't treat this as a normal country and say, I'm gonna, conclude a treaty or something. No, this is not what you do. This is, I mean, if the Obama-Biden team want to conclude this in order to pump money into Hezbollah, that's their business. Israel has no business to be part of this, because especially there is no actual economic even rationale for Israel. You see, the Karish, everyone says, is outside Lebanese claims. Right. So the only response for Israel is to defend it. Right. Full stop. Nobody can actually infringe on it or cut a deal over it. And in fact, the Karish, I mean, which is going to start, it hasn't even started production. Once it starts production, its reserves are much smaller than Leviathan and Tamar and so on, which are the core of Israel's export
natural
capability.
Gas.
So, I mean, it will add to it, there's no question, and maybe some little ones around it that this ship, the Energian ship, is going to be able to draw and hopefully hook up to the rest of the grid and allow Israel to export it. Yes, but that part is not under discussion in these negotiations. That's Israel. The part that's under discussion is Block 72 in Israel, what used to be called the Alon D. And that's like the fourth, but that's not been explored yet. Let alone, there's no rigs, there's no licenses, there's nothing. It hasn't been explored yet. And what Hezbollah wants, what the Lebanese wants, same thing, is a prospect of potential gas that they have had surveys tell them that this may be a prospect. It crosses the line 23. So it's not only their maximalist claim, which is the line 23, it goes beyond it into Block 72, and they don't want, obviously, to share it overtly, because that becomes a form of normalization. What's interesting is that this is something attractive for some people in Israel, and certainly in the Biden administration, because, it's very clever. This way we get them in some sort of a adjacent normalization track or something. It's ridiculous. But what they want rather is to have a way to bypass any sharing so they can have that cut that protrudes into Israel all for their own. And now they're discussing ways of doing that, either to have a zigzag line or to have compensation for Israel for it and whatever. All it does is one, either entangle Israel and Hezbollah together in this, which is insane if you're
Crazy.
Israel. And the second thing it does is it sets the forward, because now they're in an Israeli bloc. So who's to say they're not going to use the stunt again down the road when there are Israeli exploration? But the point is that these are not essential for Israel right now. There's no production happening.
No, and it's also, Israel has no interest in pursuing these negotiations. To the contrary, but and again, this sort of goes back to where we started and where I'd like to finish our talk for today, which is Biden and the fact that he's coming to the region. He's going to get a Medal of Honor from Israel's president, which is just, I mean, it's not weird. It's because, Paris got the Presidential Medal of Freedom from Obama, and he invented the Israeli Presidential Medal of Freedom to give to Obama to reciprocate the gift when Obama came here in 2014. And now President Herzog is giving it to the equally pro-Israel Joe Biden. But so, I mean, he's coming here. He's coming here to advance an incredibly hostile anti-Israel policy, both in relation to the Palestinians, in relation to the Saudis, and most importantly, in relation to Iran. And here you have, the Lebanese negotiations going on at the same time to help the Iran's Lebanese Foreign Legion. And it's based.
You make Iran a player in Eastern Mediterranean energy. That's what they're doing.
So the Americans are making the Iranians a player in Eastern Mediterranean energy. That's a good way to sum it up. And so, not that the caretaker government cares, but I mean, for Israelis looking into this, what would be your advice for how to handle the Biden visit, and then moving forward as well?
Well, on the Lebanese track, very importantly, they should not succumb to the pressure to get this. I mean, I don't know what this caretaker government is going to do, but certainly the idea that these guys are going to sign something when they have no majority in Knesset, when they're going to be out, in a couple of months in November before the election, like the idea, so the idea that they're going, to negotiate this under pressure and under the threat of your Hezbollah, that should be a no-brainer. No, we stop. We don't do this, right? I mean, you can do it in a million ways. You don't even have to say no. I mean, I would say no, but you don't have to say no. You can say, well, yeah, we'll study this, we'll discuss this, blah, 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 and drag it on and pass it on to when you have a legitimate government that decides to do what it wants to do with it. Number one. Number two, I would definitely back away from this very dangerous adoption of the American fake distinction between Lebanon and Hezbollah. This has consequences for Israel that are far beyond this maritime border issue, and it's very dangerous, and it should not be something that any Israeli government adopts and internalizes. On the Palestinians, I mean, okay, they succumbed to this phone call that was engineered by the U.S. so that Biden can include it in the op-ed and so on. I don't think there's going to be, and I mean, to be fair to Lapid, even when the French tried to push him on the Palestinian stuff, he kind of ignored it and bypassed it. So I don't believe there's going to be anything on that end, but it doesn't mean that the U.S. administration isn't going to push its own things that are aimed, again, to revive the 67 framework that I mentioned earlier, and which nullifies everything that the Trump administration has done in Jerusalem, the issue of the sovereignty there, and all of that. So they have to be very vigilant, any Israeli government, future Israeli government, as to these maneuvers that they do. But ultimately on Iran, I think there's an understanding that they know that, I mean, if there is any self-delusion that somehow the deal isn't going to happen and therefore we can torque this administration back to our view of the world on the Iranian. That's just not going to happen. These guys are committed to this deal. They're going to do it one way or another. If Israel is going to take action, it's going to take action independently. It's not going to be in cooperation with the Biden administration. And they're going to continue their bilateral track with Saudi Arabia bilaterally. Now, I mean, I'm sure these guys are going to try to muscle in on it to get some credit, but they have to be, both of them, I think the Saudis are going to, I'm very doubtful that the Saudis are going to hand this kind of victory to the Biden administration while they're getting nothing on Iran. I find it very dubious, a proposal.
So you trust the Saudi strategic wisdom on this, is what you're saying?
I think so. I mean, who knows? The pressure of the United States is no small thing. When the United States comes down, but it's interesting because the Saudis have been remarkably and admirably resistant to another scam. You see, if the maritime border scam is the tool that the administration is using with Israel to invest in Lebanon, what they're using with the Saudis was the LAF, the Lebanese Armed Forces. They've been trying for over a year to get the Saudis to underwrite the Lebanese Armed Forces, to pay their salaries. The administration, believe it or not, for the last year and a half has been leaving no stone unturned in American assistance programs to try to get every last cent out the door to pay the salaries and subsidize the salaries of the LAF and the police force in Lebanon. And most recently, the Saudis have always rejected it, to their credit. Most recently, the Americans scored success by having Qatar submit $60 million to pay their.
Well, why not? They're paying Hamas's salaries. They might as well pay, Hezbollah factotum salaries as well.
They want everyone to subsidize what is an Iranian equity. That's the bottom line. And I think the Saudis, to their credit, have said, yeah, no, we're not gonna play. But we'll see if they come down hard on them on other issues, whether they'll be able to hold out or not. But I don't think on the issue of a deal with Israel that they're going to hand such a major victory to this administration while it's moving ahead with Iran the way it is.
All right. Well, listen, I think we're going to have to leave it at that. It's, as always, illuminating to talk to you, Tony, and I'm sure that my audience appreciates you just as much as I do. I think it's very important for us to get the full picture, particularly of Lebanon, but more generally of Iran and its tentacles, and the Biden administration's view of it all, from Tony Badran. And I look forward to having you back on the show again soon. And in the meantime, guys, make sure that you subscribe to this program and that you share it with your friends, and let's get the word out. We'll see you again. Next week. Take care.